Talk to this. All right, guys. Just give it a few more seconds to let a few more people come on in before we kick off today. All right, here we go. Well, welcome to today's Picaluna fireside discussion. By way of introduction, my name is Julian Brockhurst. Thank you very much for joining us for this Venture Talk fireside chat. Quickly, for those that don't know, VentureCrowd is a digital investment platform that specializes in alternative investments. As of last month, we had over 69, I think it's now 70,000 registered members who have invested over $250 million with us. So VentureCrowd is a purpose-driven business. Our mission is to empower everybody to back a better future. So if you want to find out more information, please visit VentureCrowd's website and the Picaluna deal page where you can find where you can invest at any time during today's fireside chat. Finally, before I do hand you over, please do remember that this is a chat. And to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to post any questions you may have, and we'll get to them at the end of the discussion. But now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. Hosting today, I have Alex Knight. Alex is an investment manager at VentureCrowd. He's an experienced angel investor and venture capitalist and invests and partners with high growth companies. Alex is also joined by our special guest, Greg Inglis, the managing director of Picaluna. He's an experienced managing director with a demonstrated history of working in the consumer service industry, has strong business development professional skills in digital strategy, advertising sales, advertising, integrated marketing, and pure sales. So I'll won't hold it up and I'll hand you over to Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Julian, for the kind introduction. Appreciate it, mate. Now, before we dive into Picaluna, I wanted to talk a little bit about death tech or death technology. For those on the session today, you may already know a little bit about death tech or end-of-life technology, and it can seem like crude terminology, and death being always a hard subject to talk about, but I will use the terminology death tech today because it's primarily the industry accepted terminology. Now, death is something that each of us knows is coming at some point, and unfortunately, most people would rather put off the mortality discussion instead of facing it head on. And because of this, death catches many families off guard. Now, death technology as a sector can be split into two main categories. The first category being technology that provides people with tech and services related to end-of-life planning. And the second is technology as it applies to methods of final disposition. Now, traditionally, this would have been technology related to cremation or burial, and this is the category that Picaluna fits into. With funerals needing to be planned rapidly and sometimes unexpected, the immediate need creates a situation where families are expected to make hundreds of decisions to honor the life of a loved one in the space of sometimes just hours. They're also faced with spending thousands that they may not have. Now, these issues have long existed, but with the increase of deaths due to COVID-19 and growing conversations centered around death, companies like Picaluna are starting to stand in the gap to make this process easier. And to tell us a bit more about Picaluna and how they help create beautiful funerals, we do have Greg Inglis, Managing Director, joining us today. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
Thanks for the intro, Alex and Julian. Nice to be here.
Mate, you've had a pretty broad experience in this sector, and as Julian noted at the start, can you give us a bit of a background, pardon me, a bit of a background on your experience and how Picaluna came about?
Yeah, sure. My co-founders and I didn't come from the industry. We came up with an idea back in 2010, boy, it seems so long ago, that we would have a memorial website where people could share stories about the deceased across social media. And so we went about building a prototype and looked at monetizing it in the marketplace, and we found that very difficult. So we sort of, in dealing with funeral directing businesses, which we hadn't done before, we identified we thought was a mission critical problem in that they did a lot of their funeral arranging, their event planning on paper. So they would meet with the family with an arrangement form, an 8-page arrangement form, where they collect all the information about not only the funeral, but the information required to register the death with births, deaths, and marriages. And they do that all on paper by hand. And then they come back into the office and take the information from that one form and populate all the other forms required to run a funeral. So we sort of thought to ourselves, why don't we solve that problem for them? You know, why don't we build some cloud-based funeral arranging software? And so we went about doing that. And so we worked for about 14 months building the software. We worked with 7 different funeral directors, a couple across in Christchurch in New Zealand. We got told the Kiwis were a little bit more advanced than we are over here, and they were great. And so we finally finished the completion of the build after 14 months, and I went out doing what I do. I'm a salesman. So I signed up, I think it was about 10 funeral directing businesses within about 4 weeks. We thought, you beauty, we've got a great business here. We can take this global and all that. And fast forward 4 months, and we hadn't onboarded any of the funeral directing businesses that we had signed up. And so we were really perplexed with this. We thought we had got the right price point on a per funeral basis rather than a subscription per month. So that if they were quiet, they weren't paying for the software. We had worked with funeral directing firms building the software so that it was in tune with their process on how they do things. It eliminated errors. We did some time and motion studies. So we just couldn't understand why these businesses weren't onboarding. So when we sort of got under the hood and really tried to understand their business, the typical funeral arranger, so the person entrusted with meeting with the family, getting all that information to run the funeral, and also the information required to register the death with births, deaths, and marriages, you know, they're really busy. They typically work a 50-hour week if they're in Sydney and Melbourne. You know, they'll take, you know, even in a medium-sized firm in Sydney and Melbourne, they'll do 3 to 5 arrangements a week. They'll take paperwork home at night with them. You know, every second or third weekend, they'll be on call, which means they've got to have their phone beside them over the weekend in case they get a call from a nursing home that they have to organise a transfer. They're typically not paid for that. That's just expected as part of their role. And they're not paid a great amount of money for the experience that they carry. So, you know, typically in Sydney and Melbourne, it'll be anywhere from 45,000 to 50,000 per annum, no matter how experienced they are. So when the business owner says, I've just signed up to cloud-based funeral arranging software and said, I want you to learn it, you know, they reject it quite obviously and turn back. So it was about mid-2015, we were on a flight back from Melbourne, another unsuccessful trip trying to onboard one of our customers, that my co-founder, Paul, turned to me on the plane and he said, Celebrants. He said, we should do this ourselves. We should put the software in the hands of celebrants. And that's where the idea was born. And so from then, we started this journey of getting Picaluna off the ground. We ran a trial. We heard that the Salvation Army were interested in doing funerals. So we came to an agreement with them to do a trial. We started that trial in January of 2016. We set up a business called Magnolia Funerals because they didn't want to put their 150-year-old brand and name and charity to a trial. So we ran 40 funerals. We started with 5 celebrants, and as our operations sort of team to run the funerals, we worked out of 4 aged care businesses that the Salvation Army ran, and we were really successful. We ran 40 funerals out of there. And one of the big learnings we had with that was that we thought that all the funerals would come from the nursing homes, but actually 18 of the 40 funerals we ran came from the celebrants and their communities. So we had this little light bulb moment that not only the celebrants would be the operational team and be the celebrant on the funeral, they could actually be our source of funerals as well, if you want to call it a sales force of sorts. So then we launched Salvo's Funerals. We ran a further 26 funerals for them, and then we agreed to part ways. They went on their own, and we started Picaluna in October 2016, and we've been on that journey ever since. And to date, I think we're up to about 1,550 funerals since then that we've presided over.
Yeah, mate, thanks for that great extensive background on how Picaluna came to be. You touched on a few things there around the problem that you were seeing when you were going through that manual, I guess, workflow and data information capture. So what is it now, you know, having gone through all those, the funeral director sales process that didn't really work, and then starting Picaluna, what is it now exactly that Picaluna does, and what problem is that really solving for a lot of people?
I think we're solving 2 problems. If you think about it from our perspective, we've got 2 customers. We've got the families, obviously, they're our primary concern. We want to do what's right by the families. And then we've got celebrants. So if I just touch on celebrants for a moment, celebrants typically, especially in New South Wales where we're based, if they get a funeral, it's typically through a funeral directing business. And they're paid, somewhere between $250 to $350, $400 for doing the celebrant job. So A, they're really not paid commensurate with the amount of value that they bring. So they're not paid what they're worth. B, they get plugged into the process a day or two after the funeral director's already sold the 35-minute service at the chapel and the expensive coffin and everything. So the celebrant has little or no creative input into that process. They're left with a template that they've got to try and fit into. And by nature, all the celebrants that I come across are really creative people. They're not in this role to make millions of dollars, because there's not millions of dollars to be made. They're in it because they really have a profound service to give to families. And by inheriting this template, they really don't have that creative input into that process. And then the third thing that is a block for them is that they rely on the funeral business to give them work. So if they're not in the funeral business as good books, they don't get the work. So what we did, we flipped that on its ear. We said, righto, let's get you paid what you're worth, not only for the celebrant side of things. Through the software, it basically democratizes the process of running the whole funeral. So they can not only just be the celebrant, they can now be the funeral arranger and the celebrant on the funeral. So they get paid what they're worth doing. The second problem that we solve for them is that they have total creative input with the family. So they're not incentivized anymore to put the funeral into a particular chapel and run it at a particular time or upsell a coffin or anything. I mean, if the family has a carpenter in the family and they want to build the coffin, well, then the celebrant will find plans on how to build a coffin. So they're in total creative control of that whole process with the family, so that they can co-create something that's really authentic, really personal. And then thirdly, through that aha moment that we had in the Salvos trial, we empower them on how they can go and get work themselves through their communities, how they can communicate to their communities that they're not only a funeral celebrant now, but they can do the whole thing. And they can do it really personally with transparency and compassion. And so that's the problems we solve for the celebrants. So we democratize that process. So it's very easy for them to run the funeral now with the software. For the families, it's an industry that's been slow to evolve. I dare say that some sectors within the industry has taken advantage of a very vulnerable customer that they know is not really going to shop around that much. And so for us, the problems we're solving for family is the family has had a lack of transparency in the dealings with the industry, broadly speaking. They haven't had a lot of choice. So typically they're sort of funneled into a funeral directing homes chapel or a chapel at a cemetery or crematorium. And it's typically 45 minutes. So it's sort of rushed in this cookie cutter approach. There's no choice around that. And so there's no personalization. There's no, he was a golfer, let's have it at his golf club. Or he was a surfer, let's have a paddle out on a Sunday and have the coffin present at the local surf club and have a barbecue and all celebrate that person's life. There's no personalization around that. So for families, we're solving, we're offering transparency, authenticity, personalization. And so that's the problems we're solving for them. So if you think about those two things, they're the problems we're solving, and it's all enabled by the tech. The software makes it happen, because the software, you can basically put that in the hands of a celebrant, no matter what age or no matter what technical capabilities. It's very, very user-friendly, and we've got a really good training program that we put them through.
Yeah, awesome. So it's solving a lot of problems for celebrants and for families, and you did just touch there on the tech. Can you give us, I guess, a bit more of an overview of what the tech actually does and how it works?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, if you think about a funeral is an event. So it's event planning. Okay. So with event planning, you've got a checklist. Like any business, the funeral business is run on forms. There's all sorts of forms. There's florist order forms, there's statutory declaration forms, permission to cremate. There's, medical certificate forms. There's forms in booking the hearse, et cetera, et cetera. So it does a couple of things. So it obviously event manages the process. It captures all the data in a linear fashion. So you sit with the family and you capture all the data on the system. It then populates the necessary forms in the back end, and then it'll communicate those forms out either via SMS, via fax, or via email out of the system. So it's actually paperless. All of our celebrants, they have iPads or tablets that they take into a meeting. The family signs all the documentation that needs signing on the tablet, and there's no paper. And so everything gets signed out. So it creates a lot of efficiencies around that process. It's also got an extensive checklist so that the celebrants don't miss anything. To back them up, we've got an operations team. So the operations team handles, I guess you could say, the first 24 hours. So when we know that a death has happened and we've got the funeral, our operations team will contact the place of death, make sure that there's the right documentation in place, the doctor's papers, etc., book the transfer to take the deceased into our care. From there, that's when the celebrant kicks in. So they will then organise an arrangement meeting with the family and go and meet with the family to start co-creating what the celebration or what the memorial will look like.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate the insight that you gave us there, Greg. So I guess, how has the technology developed over time? You gave us some insight into the business developing, but how has the tech developed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I use an analogy, right? So we call it Form Sharer, our current version of the software. It's like we created the iPhone 3, okay? It was based on a platform called Picaluna for any of the nerds out there, using JavaScript. I think we're now up to Java 12. And Kahuna, the platform we originally built the software on, is no longer supported, hasn't been supported for 4 years. So we're actually just in the process for the last 12 months building a new software product. And obviously, with everything we've learned along the way of doing 1,500 odd funerals and tweaks we can make in the process, that'll help both the family, help our celebrants, help suppliers interact within the ecosystem. Also, technology has come, so we're building the new tech on serverless, using JavaScript, and it'll be, my developer says it'll be 1,000 times more efficient than FormShare is, our current software. So if you think about just a family interaction with the software now, we can enable a family login so that they can put some ideas into the system around, what flowers they want, or they can put on all the information that we need to record the death with births, deaths, and marriages. Instead of taking up 45 minutes in an arrangement meeting, they can do that in their own time through the portal, right through to creating efficiencies in our training, in our onboarding of new celebrants. So at the moment, the digital training on the tech platform in its current formation, FormSharer, probably takes us about 4 weeks of several Zoom sessions each week with homework that they've got to do and an assessment at the end of that before they actually get out into the field and do the proper training, the practical training out in the field on funerals. We're envisaging that with Conductor, the new software, when we're hoping to have a prototype ready for testing sometime in late November. Hopefully in the hands of celebrants before Christmas. I think that onboarding part of the Conductor will take a week. So if you think about taking a 4-week process and condensing it into a week, that means that our recruitment, our onboarding and training, and also our retention of our existing celebrant cohort will be a lot better, a lot more effective.
Awesome. So you mentioned that new software, I believe you call Conductor, and how it will take that training time and lower it. That's going to be out, it said, hopefully in the hands of celebrants before Christmas. What's beyond that? Where does that go next?
So if you think about we had COVID get in the way of our expansion plans. We were ready to launch Melbourne. I think I did a trip to Melbourne in the first week of March in 2020. And with 3 purposes, my daughter was just starting RMIT University down there, so I wanted to get her settled in. I wanted to surf the new wave pool out at Tullamarine, and then we were putting the final touches into our mortuary, etc., and the suppliers that we needed to launch. And we were going to launch in April, and come April they were in lockdown. So that our expansion sort of got put on hold for 2 years. But the 6 years that we've been in existence has been fine-tuning our business model, our product market fit, getting celebrants rusted onto our ecosystem. It's not just about the software. It's not just about how much they get paid. It's the operations team that they've got behind them. It's this ecosystem of like-minded celebrants that they can draw upon experience. It's social events. We've got a wellness program. All those sort of things gets them rusted on. So we're at a point now on the back end of the pandemic that we really want to expand. So we want to take it into Melbourne. We want to take it into Southeast Queensland, and then over the next 3 to 5 years across Australia and New Zealand. And Conductor will enable that to happen at pace. If you think about our business compared with a typical funeral business, so the typical funeral business is bricks and mortar. That's their shop front, right? I think InvoCare, the big player, has 330 odd shop fronts across Australia and New Zealand. Picaluna doesn't have a shop front. It's asset light. So, because the celebrants aren't employees, they're onboarded as contractors, even though we sort of treat them like employees, and we don't have any shop fronts. We outsource everything from mortuary care to hearses to venues, florists, etc. So we can grow and scale at pace, where other traditional methods you can't, because you've got to buy a property, you've got to maintain that property, etc. So that's what the future, and that's what Conductor is going to enable us to do. We could do it on FormShare, our current software, but it'd be a little bit frustrating with the onboarding and that sort of thing. So we suspect that we'll get Melbourne up and running. We've already put the wheels in motion. We've got a cohort in Melbourne that we're starting to train up, and we should be doing funerals in Melbourne before the end of the year. Then we can really start ramping up what we call induction days, where we can do maybe an induction day in each of our territories, one every 2 months, where we advertise. We get a whole bunch of celebrants to come in for a half day. They learn all about Picaluna, about what the next steps are, about how they can earn, about the training and everything. And that it sort of serves two purposes, the induction day. It's both to get them more excited and to take next steps, or if they go there and they realize it's not quite what they thought, and they'll leave there saying, I don't want to be a funeral arranger, but I'll be a Picaluna supporter anyway. I'll be a cheerleader. So that's the plan. That's what the future brings. So we've got a pretty aggressive 3 to 5 year plan to take this business across Australia and New Zealand. We think we fit a niche that no one else is fitting.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. And it's good to hear about the Melbourne cohort getting up and running. You mentioned your aggressive 3 to 5 year plan there. Like, what is the potential market size for a business like Picaluna?
Well, there's 160,000 deaths in Australia on average. Between the two publicly listed companies, so that is InvoCare and Propel Partners, they hold about 36% roughly, depending on what metric you go on. So the total addressable market is whatever sort of chunk of that 160,000, funerals each year, I guess, and then across in New Zealand as well. The addressable market from, if you think about our two customers, we've got one, the families, and we've got to get the funerals through there. But if you think about our celebrants, are both our funeral arrangers as well as our good channel to market for getting funerals. There are 9,600, I think, registered Commonwealth celebrants in Australia, and we've got 32 currently trained up as funeral arrangers. So if you want to have a look at that as an addressable market on how we grow on the back of a celebrant cohort, well, then that's huge. And then coupled with that, you don't have to be a celebrant to be a funeral arranger. So I suspect that the next wave of Picaluna people will come from maybe disenfranchised funeral arrangers with other businesses out there that see this is a much better model for them. They can plug in, plug out. It's like they're running their own little business and they get paid what they're worth. So, the addressable market on both sides is a little bit of blue sky.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a big market and a lot of room for growth. You did touch on it earlier, but I want to kind of go back to it a little bit because you did mention the two big, incumbents just then as well. What are the competitive advantages that Picaluna has compared to those other companies that already have a large market share?
Sure. I think they are of the old school. So they are, like I said before, they're bricks and mortar. So if they were to pivot, it's not going to happen easily for them. I think also the biggest advantage we've got is our network of celebrants, because as we've shown, the celebrants not only are best placed to work with families to create something truly amazing around the ceremony, they're also the community engagement that they get on sourcing funerals is incredible as well. So I think our advantage is we're asset light. So we're not on the old model. We don't have bricks and mortar, so we can scale at pace. We've got software that underpins that, and our network of celebrants, because we're built on the back of the celebrants. Ceremony is everything. Why we exist is to help families to honor their person, mourn their death. It's very sad, but also celebrate their life. And so that community can really heal and rejuvenate and move on. And you do that through ceremony. And that's where the celebrants come in. The ceremony is everything. We build everything around that ceremony. So I think those things as a whole, it's not one little thing. It's sort of the sum of the whole of all the parts. is why we've got a competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very good to get that insight. In terms of, I guess, key traction to date, you've mentioned celebrants, you've mentioned growth, how many funerals. Can you kind of give us the key highlights of the traction that you've received today with Picaluna?
So even during a pandemic, and so just to give you an example, I mean, in your intro, you sort of suggested that the deaths have gone up due to COVID. Yes, we might have had some COVID deaths, but what actually happened during those 2 years, which sort of caught everyone by surprise, is because we were wearing masks, we were washing our hands and not going out, we're in lockdowns, etc. Death rates plummeted. So in New South Wales, I think in May last year, they were down by as much as just under 16% on the average for May, to give that. So even during that, that sort of drop off during COVID, as well as funerals were restricted to just 10 people at one stage or a couple of times during 2020 and 2021, really stressful for families, but also it means that, your yields per funeral have come down and all the industry felt that. We still had really good growth year on year. So we had 60% growth from FY21 to FY22. We did 2.9 or just under 2.9 million in gross turnover in FY22. And the first quarter of FY23, we had a record quarter. So we're still growing. And generally speaking, it's been for the last sort of 2 to 3 years, it's been about a 60% year on year growth. Part of the reason why we're going to market with this small round, or two reasons. The reason why we chose VentureCrowd and equity crowdfunding was because the retail investor could get involved, and we wanted as many of our celebrant cohort to have a piece of the action, to be part of to feel that they own Picaluna. And to date, I note that 82% of our investors have been celebrants, Picaluna celebrants, or Picaluna people, which is just awesome. So part of the reason why we're doing this round at the moment is to sort of supercharge that Melbourne expansion, to get Conductor finished, to really establish our footprint in our current areas of Greater Sydney, Hawkesbury, Blue Mountains, Central Coast, Newcastle, with the view that maybe next year we look for a bigger round when we want to take it out. We've proved that we can pick it up and put it into Melbourne and run that successfully. And then we look at Southeast Queensland, Adelaide, Perth, that sort of thing, and move forward from there.
Yeah, that's great, mate. It's awesome traction to see today. And you touched on the raise there and why, which is awesome. It's great when you can bring in celebrants and people in the ecosystem that Picaluna works with into being shareholders and use that self-fulfilling ecosystem. I do want to talk quickly about the team behind you as well, because obviously with that awesome traction today, awesome growth, it's not just Greg doing it all by himself. Can you give us just a quick overview of the team that you do have and how they're helping you as part of this round?
Sure. So I think the founders, one of them's a school buddy of mine, Chris. So he's been with us from almost the beginning. He came on board in 2011. Paul, our CTO, smartest bloke in the room, he came on board in 2010. Nick Kohler, our chairman, has vast experience both at Fairfax, senior level management at Fairfax. He then went on to be managing director of Open Colleges. He brings a vast amount of experience on the boards of many businesses and done a lot of deals with there. So we're really blessed to have him on board. Elizabeth Travan is what we call our celebrant liaison director. Really, really important role. If you think about our business is built on this celebrant cohort, then who better place to sort of keep them all happy, make sure that their marketing's up to date, make sure that their wellness is up to scratch and everything, than a celebrant herself. So she comes with 18 years of both marriage and funeral celebrancy behind her. She's a director on the board. She's an investor in the business. Ivan, our developer, just brilliant. I dare say that he's the most experienced developer in Australia when it comes to funeral tech. And he'd probably be one of the most experienced in the world, considering that globally there's not a lot of investment in tech in funerals in the past. It's sort of been this old-fashioned industry that everyone sort of, I think you said about it in your intro, that not a lot of people talk about it and stuff. And that's true to the investment world as well. It hasn't really been looked at from a Silicon Valley sort of, tech sort of thing. So Ivan's been with us for 9 years. He's been building both of our software things. He understands implicitly the funeral process. So we're so blessed to have him on board. Who else have I forgotten? Sean, our CFO, he came from the Australian newspaper. He was in charge of the digital transformation for the Australian. So he brings a wealth of knowledge around digital paywalls and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's the team. Kylie, my operations coordinator, she's just brilliant at what she does. You know, you say I don't do it all by myself. We've got this awesome team behind us. So, and it's going to grow. You know, we're going to, obviously, as we move into new territories, we're going to have to get new people, and that's part of the reason why for this raise at the moment.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like you got the right people around you, and you did touch on there about growing that team as well. I kind of only have 2 more questions, and then I'll get Julian's assistance to handle some of the Q&A we do have coming through. One is about the use of funds for this round. You mentioned growing, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, but can you give us kind of a highlight of what this round will be used for?
Yeah, sure. So recruitment of celebrants, number one. Celebrants bring us 52% of our funerals, right? So it makes sense that the more celebrants you can onboard, the more funerals you're going to get through. It's a little bit, you got to, if you think about it as a two-sided marketplace, you can't put the supply side too high and then there's not enough demand to satisfy your supply side. So it's a balancing act of getting that right. But we want to recruit more celebrants. So that costs money on the recruitment side. We want to finalize conductors. So we want to put a little bit of money just to fast track the back end of the completion of conductor. And we want to grow more funerals. So we want to grow more funerals in our current marketplace. So, you know, fine tuning our Google advertising, our social media advertising, our community sort of investment in events that we put on in the community. So if you think about those 3 areas, grow more funerals, get conductor up and running, and expand into new territories and recruit celebrants. That's our main focus with this round.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, look, I only have one final question, and it's my favorite question we tend to ask everyone. In your perspective, Greg, how is the world a better place thanks to Picaluna?
How is the world a better place with Picaluna? I just think I get back to why we exist. We exist so that community can honor their person, can mourn their death, can celebrate their life, so that that community heals and moves forward and rejuvenates. It's really important. I liken what we do as a little bit of back to the future. I think in the modern Western world, certainly we've lost death literacy. We've lost that agency the community once had. See, the conductor, the undertaker 100 years ago was actually the local cabinet maker or carpenter, because they built the coffin and it was normally a pro bono. It was just a community service. The funeral parlor was the family's living room where people would come and pay vigil around the dead, and then they'd help them bury the dead. Okay. We lost that agency along the way. The process got commercialized. We lost that agency. So with Picaluna, we're just giving that agency back to family. You know, whatever form that looks like, whether it's having a funeral in the backyard of their home because it's big enough and that's where all the memories are, or it's down at the surf club, or it's at a community center, or it's in a national park, or it's on a boat. You know, we're just giving that agency back. So I think the world is a better place because we are going to change the way funerals are done for the better.
Mate, thank you so much. I'll hand over to Julian in just a sec to help out with some of these questions coming through. But as a reminder to everyone on the call, as Greg mentioned, we are running an equity crowdfunding offer for Picaluna right now. So from a minimum investment of just over $500, this opportunity is open to everyone over the age of 18 to become a shareholder in Picaluna. Picaluna has hit its minimum investment of $100,000 and is currently sitting at $255,000 invested. So for $2.87 a share, you can become a shareholder of Picaluna, and you can do that through our website. Now, Julian, can you help us out with some of these questions coming through, mate?
Sure, Alex. Thanks for that, Greg. Just got a few questions coming through, and it's going to jump around a little bit because they came through as you were talking. So we might be sort of hitting rewind for a second. But you mentioned you had the 32 celebrants. You mentioned that this money is going towards really driving the growth in that part of the business, and that they are a good lead source and, you know, a kind of an ambassador for Picaluna out there in the marketplace. So how do you plan to incentivize them with this, I guess, this raise outside of, you mentioned paying high rates. So if we take that off the table, why else would a celebrant look to come to Picaluna?
So for those reasons, so a funeral celebrant typically in the industry, as I said, they get their work through a funeral directing business. They're not really paid a lot compared with what the service that they bring. They've got no creative control of that process, and they have to rely on the funeral director for their business. So we get them paid what they're worth. So we get them paid as a celebrant as well as a funeral arranger. So typically for a full service funeral in New South Wales, they can earn $2,300 for that funeral, as opposed to $250 with another funeral directing business just as a celebrant. They're in total creative control of that process. They sit with the family and they design whatever that funeral may look like. Whether it be at a surf club because they've been a member of the surf club for so long or whatever it might be. And then we empower them on how they can run their own business, basically, get their own business, don't have to rely on Picaluna, even though we do drive leads to them. They don't have to rely on us the whole time because we teach them how to go to their communities and source their own funerals. Coupled with that, it's a great place to work in. You know, we've got like-minded celebrants as a community all around them, supporting each other. A lot of them joke with me because they say that in the marriage celebrancy, it's a little bit cliquey and a bit competitive. Whereas with Picaluna, with funeral celebrancy, we all work together. We all try and make each other better with every funeral. We've adopted a Japanese philosophy, business philosophy called Kaizen, which is continual improvement. So with every funeral we do assessments of each other in a very safe way. You know, we make it objective, not an opinion. And through that, we all get to grow through that. Not only that, we've got social events that we do. So there's a lot of reasons why plugging into Picaluna, they've got no reason to plug out. Coupled with that, they can plug in and plug out. You know, they're not employees, and so they can go on holiday whenever they want. If they choose just to do a funeral through their communities, they can just do that and not take any leads from us, or they can dive in and run it as a whole business. So there's many ways that they can engage with Picaluna. So I think that flexibility is really, really important for them.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned also with this raise as well, you're looking to expand into the different locations, looking to pick up different markets, Melbourne being a focus as well. What is the key to this expansion? Is that through the avenue of the celebrant? Is that through other, I guess, obviously marketing to the families themselves that may find themselves in that situation for the first time, hitting Google, that's where you're going to capture them as well. Are there any other key, I guess, attributes to that expansion that we're missing?
No, so celebrants is our main one. So if you train up enough celebrants, you empower them with what we've learned, over the last 6 years of what works, they then go forth and multiply, sort of thing, So that's our key. To support them, we've got to get our brand into a new territory, and that comes with Google, that comes with community engagement events, maybe some sponsorships, that sort of stuff. So primarily it's working on the celebrants, getting the right celebrants through, getting them trained, getting them excited, really giving them support, especially early days when we move into a new territory, and then back them up with Google ads, social media, et cetera, et cetera. It's not rocket science, it's pretty simple. We've sort of fine-tuned that formula over the last 6 years. We know what works, we know what doesn't work. It's funny, in our industry, we found that traditional advertising, above the line traditional advertising doesn't really work. It's when on social media that we do storytelling. We tell a story of a particular funeral we did and why we did it and what was the benefit to the family, et cetera. That really resonates with people, and that gets our brand out there. If you think about it, in our industry, it's not like, I guess, going and buying your daily coffee or going and having a meal and stuff like that, which are weekly decisions. There's a death in an Australian family, wider Australian family unit every 8.5 years. So you want to be front of mind when that cycle comes around for that family unit. And that's tough, right? Especially as Alex said, not a lot of people like to talk about it, all the time. It's not something that comes up in dinner conversations, etc. So it's our way of trying to keep front of mind so that when that does happen, and sometimes it happens suddenly, sometimes they've known that the death is coming for a while, but we just want to be front of mind there. So it's around storytelling, around community engagement, but then the best people to do that and keep their communities engaged is our celebrants.
Yeah, it's really building a platform to give the power back to these guys and girls, to enable them to, I guess, build, as you say, their sort of micro business off the back of this platform. The final one, well, there's 2 questions here, but I'll try and roll it into one. The question comes around, like, how does an exit look for Picaluna down the track? Is it likely that you look to list publicly? Is there potential suitors that may look to acquire Picaluna? And then how does it speak to the sort of the path to profitability that you guys are chasing at the moment? Sure.
So, I've been at this for 12 years, and at some stage I'd like to, bear the fruits of my hard labor. So look, there's 3 possibilities I see, or maybe 4. So there's leading towards an IPO, which is a general one, but then, that's got its downside as well. There's a trade sale. We get ourselves big enough that we'd, be interested as long as the trade sale was with a partner that was congruent with our values. The last thing we want to do is undermine our values. We've got a document we call a set of ethos that we believe in. We call it the Picaluna way. So if it doesn't really meet the Picaluna way, then we wouldn't necessarily do that deal. The other thing is that we just keep trundling along and we start offering dividends to our shareholders, as we start to get profitable. At the moment, any profits we get, obviously, we're pouring back into growth. So for the next sort of 3 years, I'll be very transparent with investors or potential investors on this webinar that for the next sort of 3 years at least, as a minimum, we want to grow this business really quickly. So we're going to be putting profit back into, back into the business for growth. But as an exit strategy, yeah, we do want one. So there'll either be an IPO, it'll be a trade sale, we'll be paying dividends or something of the like.
Gotcha. Okay. Hopefully that answers everyone's questions that have come through on the Q&A. I just want to say a big thank you once again to yourself, Greg, for joining us and giving us your time. And yeah, I'll throw to Alex to close out the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Julian. And thanks everyone that did send through questions and joined us today. Just for a reminder again, you heard a lot about Greg and Picaluna today and where they're going into the future. Some key highlights of the previous operations of Picaluna: they grew fast with 2.9 million revenue in FY22, which was up 60% on the previous year. Since they launched, they've conducted over 1,380 funerals and donated in excess of $100,000 to over 170 different charities. This equity crowdfunding is your opportunity to own shares in an innovative company, changing the way funerals are done for the better. Again, that minimum investment is of just over $500 to become a shareholder today. Everyone over the age of 18 has the opportunity to invest, and the crowdsourced funding offer is currently live on our website. Each share is $2.87 per share, and they're sitting at $255,000 invested. Once it does reach the maximum, we will need to close the deal page and we cannot accept any further investments. There is more information than just on today's webinar, and you can find that in the offer document available on the VentureCrowd deal page. Again, thank you to Picaluna, Greg, everyone on this webinar, Julian. I hope you really found the webinar helpful and insightful as much as I did. We will also send you a copy of this webinar, and you can post any questions on the deal page that will be answered by our team or Greg from Picaluna. Feel free to give us a call if you have any questions at all. Thank you and have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.